Okay, welcome. We're going to talk about compliance this week. And as we talk about compliance, we're going to talk about it from both an ethical and legal perspective. And so I'm going to use this mind map to kind of keep track of all the little ideas that we talk about this week. Okay? So let's first talk about ethics. So ethics being a form of philosophy where we think about moral judgments, nature, logic, that sort of thing. This is how we should act. It could also be a set of rules that we should live by. And so we think about ethics in the context of this class material around how we should behave with respect to information security and in general security of information that we are charged with as professionals in this field. This boils down to what types of decisions should you be making in the workplace as you go about your job. And you have to make choices about not only what is legal, but also what is ethical. And so, to use an example, because I have access to a system with highly confidential data, it may not be illegal per se for me to go and look at that data. But would it be ethical as a security professional to go look at data that I'm not authorized to see? Okay. That I might encounter in my job or use that information to my own personal advantage. So as we look at ethics, there are different frameworks which are used. Okay. So there's normative, there's meta, there's descriptive, and there's applied ethics. And those are described further on page 67 of the book. And then the last one is, let's add another one here. Last one is deontological. Okay. All right, so these are let's go ahead and add a new category here for frameworks. And these are the 5 frameworks. We can do this. Put these underneath the frameworks. And I find mind maps are very helpful for organizing thoughts. So even though we don't have any tests per se in this class, these are very helpful for you to learn and understand. Okay? All right, then there are ethical standards or approaches. Okay, so these are the standards or approaches. And so we can have utilitarian, rights, fairness or justice approach, common good, and virtue. Right. And so every day in this field, we come across situations that require us to exercise our ethics and make ethical decisions. And so let's talk about some examples of this that you might encounter in your careers. Okay. So we're not doing our live class until next week. That's a reminder, by the way, that there's a live class next week. But in general, is it acceptable if you are the email administrator for you to go through and look at email messages? Having been an email administrator myself, I've had access where I could have looked at people's messages. I did not because I didn't feel like it was an ethical usage of my authority. Okay? Is it also permissible for me to install software that snoops on other employees? Probably not a good idea to be doing that sort of thing unless the company has a policy where that's something that employers are aware of. Okay? Again, we want to make sure we have a policy behind it to make sure that we are doing things in accordance of expectations and norms within the organization. Okay? So I'm gonna mention one more example here, but then I'm also gonna tell a story about a situation where I had an employee who was not ethical. Real life situation. Okay? So let's assume we have a network sniffer. Okay. And your job is to sniff network packets. Okay. And that's the reason you're supposed to do that is because you're trying to troubleshoot some sort of problem with your firewall. Okay. That could be an ethical, it's part of your job, you're supposed to be doing that. But does that mean you can, turn on that packet sniffer anytime you want to go see what other people are doing? No, right? So that's another example. I used to be in a role where I had to test people's passwords many years ago. And this all started because one of the employees kept reusing Big Fish as their password. Everybody knew they were a Fisher person, and they used Big Fish for their password. And every single time it would get audited by an external auditor, the person's password would be flagged as not secure. And so part of my job became going through and testing passwords and trying to crack them. Okay. That is, because I had to do it as part of my job, that was considered ethical conduct. But turning around and doing that when it's not part of your job and it's not an expectation, that could be a problem. Okay. Now it's time for my story. So story time with the professor. All right. And in this case, I had an employee who worked for me who was a manager, and they had an employee who worked for them who was, we'll just say, a PC technician, like a desktop support person. And they had access to our company iCloud account, which was associated with all of our iDevices. And so we had several different iCloud accounts. Each one had a series of devices for the company. Well, one day we were in a meeting and this person comes running in all excited and starts bragging about how they traced one of my other employees to a location outside of the country. And we're talking about how they've been following them around all morning, watching where they went. Okay, that's a huge ethical, whether it's illegal or not is up for debate, but it's certainly unethical to do something like that. And in this case, this person had been doing it with other employees as well, and just hadn't bragged about it and hadn't gotten caught. The person got caught not only because they went and told everybody about it, but the person was also disciplined as well. Okay, so a huge issue, right? And then it led to trust issues with the individual who had been spied on. Just imagine if that was you. You wouldn't like that, so don't do that with other people. So with respect to the field, there can be professional codes that you should follow, right? And so in this case, there are different things with respect to ethics that we should adhere to. So we shouldn't use our power as a IT person or security person to harm other people. We shouldn't interfere with other people's work that they're doing. We shouldn't be snooping around on their files. We shouldn't use the computer to steal. We should not use the computer to commit falsehoods. We shouldn't copy software or use software which we haven't paid for. We shouldn't copy or use any type of copyrighted materials music, movies, TV shows, what have you, if we haven't paid for them. And then if we have signed an agreement, like a license, and we're using them outside of the confines of that license, well, it's actually illegal, but it's also unethical to do so. And so one of the things that I usually tell my students is that music file that you downloaded and shared with your friend, that's not only illegal, it's unethical. Okay? And as a professional in this field, you should hold yourself to a very high standard of ethics. All right. Now, one of the challenges with ethics is it's not something that is forced upon you in school. Some programs require it, not all. Sometimes general ed covers ethics and moral problems, things like that, but not always. And so if you haven't had that type of education in your school career, you might expect that you're going to get some sort of ethical education in the workplace. And not necessarily. A lot of it depends on the organization that you go to work for. So if you don't have that education, that's not an excuse to not behave in a ethical manner. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and move on. And so let's go ahead and talk about deterring unethical and illegal behavior. Okay. So deterrence is when we're trying to prevent some sort of action that we don't want by threatening punishment, okay, if that act takes place. So we might have a policy. So we might have a policy that tries to deter unethical behavior. Okay? So we might policy all right, but we may or may not be successful with that. Okay. What we want to try to do by deterring this unethical behavior, we want to avoid excuses such as ignorance. Okay, well, I wasn't aware that this was a problem. Okay, so what can we do to deal with that? Well, we can do security education and training awareness programs, or SETA, which can help, as well as things like policies that people have to sign and acknowledge that they've read. Okay. Another one that we want to try to deter is accidents. Okay. So if we have the right controls in place, we can deter accidents. So we try to have controls in place to prevent this. Okay. For the ignorance run, I should have put it in here. We want to have a SETA program and policies, procedures. Okay. And then intent. Okay. So there are, unfortunately, there are people with malicious intent who act in an unethical or criminal manner. Okay. So this has to do with a state of mind. Okay. Right, and so we want to have, state of mind. We want to have, controls in place, penalties, and we want to make sure we have a set of programs, okay, and policies. All right. All right, so we've got that piece. All right, so how do we deter? So one way that we can deter is using a policy. Okay. And then that policy can have penalties. We can also have, as another means, we can have a control. All right, so this could be a technical control or something else. And then sometimes there are laws that apply. Okay. So there can be a penalty as well for laws. All right. Now, the only way these can be effective is if there's a fear. So the penalty must have teeth. Okay. If all you get is a slap on the wrist, it's not going to be an effective penalty. Okay. So termination, imprisonment, prosecution, these sorts of things can be helpful. All right. Probability of being caught. So we're just going to have this here. Probability of being caught. So controls help with this. We'll say controls and auditing. Those both help. Okay. So if we know that there are controls in place to prevent someone from doing something, or there's an audit trail that anytime anybody does anything, it's tracked, then we are in a much better position to ensure probability being caught, which deters people. Okay. And then the next area is the probability of penalty. Okay. If there's a high probability of penalty, then we're in good shape. If we just write a policy with not strong enough penalties in it, then we are not going to be successful at keeping people to be deterred. Excuse me. All right. Now, let's go ahead and do another one here. All right. So we have these things that are professional organizations. Okay. And they have what are called codes of conduct. And within this particular field, one of the examples that we have is Association for Computing Machinery, or ACM. You can get access as a student to this organization at a very low cost, and I strongly recommend it. Okay? They live by a code of ethics. Okay? Another example is the International Information Systems Security Certification Consortium, or ISC2. And they have a code of ethics as well that their members follow. And then there's a SANS, which is an organization, again, for professional certifications and education. They have their own codes. All right. So you can see lots of examples there. If you, come from the accounting world, you might be more familiar with something like ICACA here. Oops. There we go. And then we also have the Information Security System Security Association, or ISSA. So these are all different examples of organizations that have code of conduct. In other fields outside of this realm, there are similar types of things, with doctors and lawyers and things like that. All right. So now we've got ethics. All right. Let's talk about law. And so there are different types of laws. All right. And so we're not going to have time to cover all of them in here, so I'm just going to mention them and tell you a little bit about each one. Constitutional law, this has to do with, what the Constitution explicitly spells out, or state constitution, things like that. Okay? Statutory law is what Congress comes up with. All right? or state legislature create. Okay. Then you have regulatory or administrative law. So this comes from an agency or the executive branch. Okay, so this is an agency, executive branch of the federal system. Okay. This is like the executive orders that the president can issue. Okay. And then we have common law, also known as case law or precedent. Okay. These things here. This originates from the judicial branch. So judges come up with this type of law. Okay? And so common law can alter regulatory or administrative law, statutory law, or potentially even the Constitution. Okay? Now, within statutory law, there are other categories as well. So you have civil law, and then you have criminal law. And so civil law, as an example, things like contract law, family law, tort law. Tort law is a special type of law within the civil realm. It's basically to right a wrong. So if, for example, my neighbor's kid keeps trespassing on my land and kicking, my patio door and causing it to lose integrity and break, I could go after my neighbor, not the kid, but my neighbor, for his kid trespassing on my land. Okay. Or if the neighbor kid comes in and damages my wheelbarrow in the back of my yard or something. Okay. That's a trespass to my chattel being personal property. Okay. Those are tort laws. Okay. I can right a wrong. Individuals can bring civil law cases against another individual, a business, etc. Okay. Criminal law is only for harmful behaviors to society, and only a government entity can bring those cases. Okay. So the federal prosecutor, the U.S. Attorney's Office, state level prosecutors, your district attorney, that sort of thing. Okay. So criminal law is related to things that affect society as a whole. Now, you can have a civil law case and a criminal law case with two different outcomes. Okay? The O.J. Simpson case is a prime example of that. Not guilty under criminal law, but responsible under civil law for damages. Okay? And you might ask, why is that the case? Not to get off track, but civil law has a lower standard in order to meet, to basically prosecute someone, or go after someone. I shouldn't say prosecute, but in order to win against a defendant, civil law has a much lower standard. Okay, criminal law is beyond a reasonable doubt, whereas civil law is based on a preponderance of the evidence. Okay. All right, so there are different laws as well. There are public law, there's private law. Private law is a subset of civil law, and this is the relationships between individuals and organizations. And then public law is between governments and the citizens, and other governments and employers. Okay. As part of your organization, you hopefully have a lawyer or a legal department who can help you to understand these areas. But I guess it's important to note that if you have a corporate counsel who is well-versed in corporate law, they might actually have to go outside to find counsel for something completely different. Right? Now, within the law, let's look at some examples. Okay? That relate to information security. Okay. And so some examples from an information security perspective are the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Okay. And the CFA here does not refer to Chick-fil-A. All right. This is making it a criminal act to access a computer system without authorization or exceeding access. Okay? So if you find a way to do something, you could be breaking the CFA. All right? There's the Computer Security Act. Okay? And this applies to government computer systems. The agency that's responsible for this area is now known as the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and they put forth a lot of different regulations and recommendations for security. So if this is an area of interest, and if you're interested in this field, I strongly recommend it, looking at it. NIST 853 is a document that pertains to FISMA and FedRAMP. Okay? Very important if you plan to do any work in the federal government. But there are also many other NIST standards. So another common security one is NIST 800-171. Okay? And there are a variety of others. Okay? So there are many others. All right? So definitely look into that if you are interested in this field. Electronic Commerce, or Communications Privacy Act. And this has to do with wiretapping. Okay. We have HIPAA. This has to do with healthcare data. Okay. And then lastly, the one that is applicable to all of you is the Privacy Act of 1974. If you have financial aid, this applies to you. Okay. Whenever you sign your loan documents or grant documents, that act is mentioned in the documents there. Now, there are lots of other laws. So look on pages 80, 81, let's see here, 80 through 84, okay, for more examples. There's a lot of different ones here, and it's not necessarily exhaustive, all right? For more information about each one of these, you can look at the details. So I'm just going to indicate the details, pages 84 through, they go pretty far back here. 95. Okay. All right. Okay, so now there are some new laws that have come up. So I'll go and add those here. So new privacy-related laws. Okay. And these impact whether you are in the jurisdiction or not. Okay. So to give you an example, the first one is the GDPR. This is the European Union. Okay. This has big teeth. Okay. Huge fines. Okay. Billions of dollars potentially. All right. So not something you want to mess around with. There's the CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. Okay. And then there's also the new replacement for the CCPA, which goes into effect, I believe, January 1st of next year. And that's from the November election. Okay. Now, what do these mean? They do not necessarily mean that you are going to have to comply if you're just in the European Union, for example. GDPR applies to U.S. companies as well, if you process any data for European Union citizens or other businesses that are located in the EU. So even if you don't have any employees, if you target your site and you allow people from the European Union to use it and you don't take controls, you might be held liable under the GDPR. If you have a supplier in the European Union, you might be held liable. Okay? So this is a critical one for data protection. The CCPA, again, doesn't require that people be in California necessarily. Okay? So your business could be based in Massachusetts, but the CCPA might apply to you because your website's available to California consumers to use. Okay? And quite frankly, in the US, it would be very difficult to block people from California from using your site. Okay? It's pretty difficult to do it in other countries, but it's, you can take some technological measures to try to prevent people from other countries. You can't get everybody for a variety of reasons. So most companies just choose to adhere to these two regulations. All right. And then another one that this isn't related to privacy so much, I guess, but we have another type of law for copyright. So copyright laws, copyright being an intellectual property. So it's property from someone's mind. And so with copyright laws, one such example is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA. This one here, clearly I cannot spell anymore. This one here is related to copyright protections. And so, for example, burning a copy of a DVD is a violation. So you made a copy of a DVD for one of your friends. Don't be surprised if the FBI comes a knocking on your door. There are other laws, like in Australia, there are similar laws. European Union has similar laws as well. Okay, and now if that all wasn't difficult enough, there can be state level laws. Okay. And so I gave an example of CCPA as one example. Okay. And so usually organizations comply with the law that is the most strict that might apply to them. Right? Now, there can also be, besides laws and ethics, there can be standards. Right? So standards are voluntary. Right? And so they can be industry-based as well. Right? So an example for some of you, depending on your career choice, would be the PCI DSS. Okay? This is the payment card industry. So credit cards, debit cards, data security standard. Okay? Very strict requirements there. Okay? Should read up on those if you're interested in that sort of thing. All right. Are you going to go to jail for not adhering to PCI? No, but you're going to find that accepting payments is going to be extremely expensive for you, and you're going to have liabilities under under laws and whatnot. Okay. Now, we can have policies as well. So we can have policies as an organization. Right? So, one of the things about laws is ignorance of the law is not an excuse. But ignorance of policy can be a viable defense. Okay? So, if you're going to have a policy, you must distribute to everybody. Okay? They have to be read and understood. So that means you might need to have them multilingual. And you also have to have things like visual impairments. So you need to have something for visual impairments to help people with a disability. Then you also need to have translations for low literacy. So if someone is not great at reading or maybe doesn't know how to read at all, you need to have some sort of translation for that policy or training. Okay. They need to be acknowledged. Okay. And you have, this is a big one. Okay. Very important. They have to be uniformly enforced. No special treatment. Okay. Doesn't matter if you're Jeff Bezos and the CEO of Amazon, or you're the janitor cleaning his executive bathroom. Okay. The policy is the same across the board. You have to enforce it the same way. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and I'm not going to really spend much time on digital forensic in this particular class because it's not a broad topic of interest to probably most people. But be sure to read through that section. I think it's an interesting section for you to take a look at, but it's not something, since we don't have any tests in this class anyways, we're not going to really use it. Okay? But digital forensics can be used to find gaps in your security, if there's a breach in your privacy, etc. You can use forensics for that. And then just again, reminder, next Monday, which I believe is February 15th, we will be doing our class live. Okay?